It's 11:47 p.m. on a Wednesday. You have an exam tomorrow. You are finally falling asleep when your phone lights up with, "Hey, you awake? Can I vent for a sec?" And before you've even fully processed the question, you're already sitting up, already typing, "Yeah, of course, what's going on?" 3 hours later, you've helped them work through a situation that had nothing to do with you, and now it's 2 a.m. Your notes are still open on the other tab, and you genuinely can't remember the last time you asked someone how they were doing without it being a reflex. An automatic shift into the role you've been playing for as long as you can remember. The strange part isn't that you helped. The strange part is that it never even occurred to you not to. If that lands somewhere specific right now, it's worth staying with. Because what's happening here isn't just that you're a good friend. It's something older than that. Something that started long before the group chats. The word for it is parentification, which sounds clinical, but the experience of it is anything but. It happens when a child ends up carrying emotional weight that was never theirs to carry, reading a parent's mood before knowing how to name their own feelings, becoming the steady one in an unsteady house, learning that being needed was the safest way to be loved. It doesn't always look like crisis. It often looks like a quiet kid who's somehow always the one everyone goes to, the one who just gets it, the one the teacher points to when she says, "See how calm he is," the one who smiles at that and thinks somewhere underneath, "Yeah, and what happens if I stop?" The first thing worth naming is the way this role follows you. In middle school, in high school, in your first semester of college, you show up somewhere new, and within weeks the dynamic reconstitutes itself, like it has its own gravity. People sense something in you, some quality of steadiness and real attention, and they orient toward it, and you let them, because this is the version of closeness that has always made the most sense to you. You're the one in the cafeteria who actually listens. You're the one who remembers what someone said 2 months ago about their parents' divorce. You're the one people text at midnight, not because they're being thoughtless, but because they've learned correctly that you will answer. What's less visible is what that costs. Research on what's called the cost of caring in adolescent friendships found that teenagers who carry a disproportionate emotional load, particularly girls, though not exclusively, show significantly higher levels of empathic distress, which is what happens when you're so attuned to another person's pain that you absorb it as your own. The emotional bandwidth you extend toward other people isn't free. It draws from something real, and when nobody is extending it back toward you, that something starts running low in ways that are slow, quiet, and genuinely hard to explain to anyone, including yourself. There's a second thing happening alongside this, and it's more uncomfortable to look at. The belief, which you probably never consciously chose, that your value lives in your usefulness. A study published in 2024 looking at young adults between 18 and 26 found that high levels of parentification correlated with low self-esteem but high self-efficacy, which means you genuinely believe you're capable. You just don't believe you're worth much when you're not being capable for someone. You can handle things, but your sense of being worthwhile is tied almost entirely to whether those things are helping somebody else. This shows up in ways that feel small but sit heavy. The guilt when you cancel plans because you're exhausted, the strange discomfort on a free afternoon when no one needs anything, the internal math that says, "My bad week doesn't count as much as their bad week, so I'll wait." You probably can't remember the last time you led with your own problems, not because nothing is wrong, but because the habit of moving toward other people's discomfort and away from your own is so deeply automatic it barely registers as a choice anymore. Your roommate is crying about her ex and you sit with her for 2 hours, even though earlier that day you got a grade back that quietly wrecked you and you don't mention it, not because you're selfless, but because "I got a bad grade" already feels thin next to her tears. And somewhere along the way you learned that the threshold for your own pain being worth expressing is extraordinarily high. Researchers call this emotional inhibition, the suppression of your own internal experience in order to keep equilibrium around you. And in people who grew up in environments where their needs consistently came second, it becomes a baseline setting, not a deliberate act. The third thing, and possibly the most disorienting one, is what rest actually feels like for you. For most people, a free evening with nothing to do is just a free evening. For you, it's slightly strange and vaguely uncomfortable, like a frequency that doesn't quite resolve. When there's no one to support and no problem to hold, the nervous system that's been calibrated for alertness doesn't just switch off, It keeps scanning, keeps waiting, because in the history it's drawing on, stillness was rarely actually safe. Bessel van der Kolk's research on chronic early stress describes how the nervous system gets recalibrated toward threat detection, and for a child who learned to read the emotional states of adults as a matter of basic survival, this isn't a metaphor. It's physiological. The hyper-awareness that makes you so perceptive about other people's moods is the same system that makes genuine rest feel slightly out of reach. Then there's the gap between what you actually feel and what you let yourself feel. You know what your friend is feeling before she says it. You clock the tension in a room the second you walk in. You can hear the difference between someone saying, "I'm fine," and meaning it, and someone saying, "I'm fine," because they don't know how to begin. But ask yourself honestly, right now, what are you feeling, and how long have you been feeling it? Because there's often a significant gap between the granular precision with which you track other people's inner lives and the vagueness with which you've learned to track your own. The false self, as psychologist Donald Winnicott described it, is a structure built to survive in an environment where your real needs weren't safe to express. It presents as competence, as maturity, as reliability, and underneath it is a part of yourself that never quite got the space to develop because the space was always being used for something else. What nobody tells you is that this skill, the listening, the reading of rooms, the ability to hold someone else's crisis without flinching, was not a gift you were born with. It was a response. Research on parentification consistently shows that children who develop these capabilities early do so because the environment required it, not because they were naturally wired for it, and there's a real difference between those two things. One is a talent. The other is an adaptation, and adaptations have a cost that doesn't disappear just because the original circumstances do. By college, the role is so built into how you move through the world that it started to shape what kind of relationships feel possible for you. You tend toward people who need things because people who need things are legible to you in a way that people who simply want to be around you are not. Being needed is familiar, and familiar is safe. Being wanted without a function attached to it is almost harder to trust because it doesn't map onto anything in your prior experience of what closeness looks like. Here's what's actually true. If you recognized yourself in any of this, it doesn't mean something is wrong with you or that your capacity for empathy is something to be suspicious of. It means you built something genuinely real out of an experience that didn't give you much of a choice. The attentiveness, the emotional intelligence, the way you make people feel understood, none of that is fake, but it was forged in conditions where you weren't allowed to also be the one who didn't have it together. And that part deserves to be acknowledged, not to undo anything, but because knowing where something came from changes how you carry it. You're allowed to need things back. You're allowed to say, "I'm struggling," without first calculating whether your struggle is heavy enough to qualify. The version of you that learned to be everyone's anchor deserves, at some point, to find out what it actually feels like to rest,